Imagine a city so powerful it challenged Rome for control of the world. A city built not by legions and conquest, but by ships and silver. This is the story of Carthage, the merchant empire that rose from a small trading post to rule the Mediterranean. Our journey begins around 814 BC on the coast of modern-day Tunisia. According to legend, Queen Dido, a Phoenician princess fleeing her murderous brother, founded the city. She cleverly struck a deal with the local Berber tribes, asking for only as much land as an ox hide could cover. She then cut the hide into incredibly thin strips, encircling a vast and strategic hill that would become the heart of her new city. Carthage, the new city, what we know as Carthage. This wasn't just a clever trick. It was a sign of the Carthaginian mindset. They were pragmatists, traders, and innovators. While other empires sharpened swords, Carthage built better ships. Their location was perfect. Situated on a peninsula with two excellent harbors, one for their massive merchant fleet, and another, circular one for their powerful navy. Carthage controlled the vital trade routes of the central Mediterranean. They were the Amazon prime of the ancient world. What were they trading? Everything. From the tin of Britain needed to make bronze, to the gold and ivory of West Africa, the silver of Spain, and the grain of Sicily. Carthaginian merchants were everywhere. Their ships, marvels of engineering, were fast and sturdy, capable of long voyages. They developed advanced navigation techniques, jealously guarding their trade routes and sea charts like state secrets. If a rival ship tried to follow them, a Carthaginian captain might even deliberately run his own ship aground just to lead the pursuer to their doom, later claiming compensation from the state. That's how serious they were about their monopoly. This vast trade network made Carthage incredibly wealthy. Their city was a bustling metropolis, a cosmopolitan hub filled with people from across the known world. Imagine the sights and sounds: magnificent temples, multi-story apartment buildings, vibrant markets overflowing with exotic goods, and the constant hum of dozens of languages being spoken. Unlike the Spartan lifestyles of early Rome or Sparta, the Carthaginians enjoyed their wealth. They adorned their homes with beautiful mosaics and imported luxuries. Their society was an oligarchy, ruled by a council of wealthy merchant families and judges, not kings or emperors. Power was tied to wealth and influence, not birthright. But you can't have that much wealth and power without attracting rivals. And Carthage's biggest rival was just across the sea, the rising Republic of Rome. For a long time, the two powers coexisted, even signing treaties to define their spheres of influence. Rome was a land power, focused on conquering the Italian peninsula. Carthage was a sea power, focused on commerce. They were like a lion and a shark, dominant in their own realms. But eventually, their ambitions were bound to clash. The flashpoint was the island of Sicily, a strategic and fertile landmass lying right between them. This sparked the First Punic War, a brutal 23-year conflict fought primarily at sea. Initially, the Romans, who were landlubbers, were no match for the experienced Carthaginian navy. But the Romans were nothing if not resourceful. Legend says they reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian warship and built an entire fleet. They added a clever invention, the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed their superior legionaries to turn a sea battle into a land battle. After decades of struggle and immense losses on both sides, Rome emerged victorious, seizing Sicily and forcing Carthage to pay a crippling indemnity. Beaten but not broken, Carthage looked for a new source of wealth and power to rebuild. They turned their attention to Spain, or Iberia as it was then known. Under the brilliant leadership of the Barcid family, starting with Hannibal Barca, they carved out a new empire. Hamilcar reportedly made his young son, Hannibal, swear a sacred oath of eternal hatred for Rome. This was personal, and Hannibal would make good on that promise in the most spectacular way imaginable. In 218 BC, he unleashed the Second Punic War. Instead of a direct naval assault, he chose a move of breathtaking audacity. He marched his army, complete with cavalry and his famous war elephants, from Spain, through the Pyrenees, across Gaul, and then over the treacherous, snow-covered Alps into Italy itself. It was a military gamble of epic proportions. Many men and nearly all the elephants were lost, but he arrived in Rome's backyard, shocking the Republic to its core. For the next 15 years, Hannibal was the boogeyman of Rome. He was a tactical genius, a master of strategy and surprise. At battles like Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most famously Cannae, he inflicted devastating defeats on Roman armies that vastly outnumbered his own. At Cannae, He used a brilliant double envelopment tactic to completely surround and annihilate a force twice the size of his. It remains a textbook example of military perfection. He roamed Italy at will, but he could never quite deliver the knockout blow. He lacked the siege equipment and political support to take the city of Rome itself. Rome, in its darkest hour, showed its legendary resilience. They adopted the Fabian strategy, named after the dictator Fabius Maximus, refusing to engage Hannibal in open battle and instead waging a war of attrition, harassing his supply lines. Then, a Roman general emerged who was Hannibal's equal, Scipio Africanus. Scipio did what Hannibal did to Rome. He took the fight to the enemy's homeland, invading North Africa. This forced Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy to defend the city. The two greatest generals of the age finally met at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. This time, it was Scipio who had the superior cavalry and the tactical masterstroke. He neutralized Hannibal's elephants and crushed the Carthaginian army. Rome had won. The peace terms were harsh. Carthage lost its overseas empire, its navy was dismantled, and it had to pay another massive indemnity. It was forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. For 50 years, Carthage endured as a demilitarized but still prosperous trading city. But some in Rome, like the senator Cato the Elder, could not forgive or forget. He ended every speech he gave, regardless of the topic, with the same chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. His wish was eventually granted. In 149 BC, Rome found a pretext to declare the third and final Punic War. This wasn't a war, it was an execution. The Carthaginians, despite being hopelessly outmatched, mounted a heroic 3-year defense of their city. Men and women fought side by side. When their weapons broke, they used tools from their workshops. When they ran out of rope for their catapults, the women cut off their own hair to be braided into new cords. But it was hopeless. In 146 BC, the legions of Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, broke through the walls. What followed was a week of brutal street-by-street fighting and a horrific slaughter. The city was systematically looted and burned to the ground. The story that the Romans salted the earth so nothing would ever grow again is likely a later embellishment, but it captures the spirit of Rome's vengeance. Carthage was erased from the map. The legacy of Carthage is a story of what might have been. What if Hannibal had taken Rome? What if this Phoenician-speaking, merchant-led empire had become the dominant power in the West instead of the Latin-speaking, military-driven republic? Our world, our laws, our languages, and our cultures would be profoundly different. Carthage may have been destroyed, but its incredible story of ambition, innovation, and defiance echoes through history, a powerful reminder of the empire that dared to challenge Rome. Ever wondered how a city founded by exiles could rise to challenge the mightiest empires of the ancient world? The secret wasn't just on land, it was on the waves. This is the story of Carthage, masters of the sea. From its legendary founding by Queen Dido on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was destined for a maritime future. Its location was a strategic jackpot, perfectly positioned to control the vital trade routes crisscrossing the Mediterranean. But a good location is nothing without the tools to dominate it, and for Carthage, that tool was its navy. Early on, the Phoenician settlers who founded Carthage brought with them centuries of shipbuilding and sailing knowledge. They didn't just build boats. They engineered marvels of the ancient world. Their primary merchant vessel, the gallos, was a round-hulled, sturdy ship designed for one thing: cargo. These round ships were the lifeblood of the city, hauling grain from Sicily, silver from Spain, and tin from as far away as Britain. Carthage became the ancient equivalent of a global logistics hub, its wealth swelling with every shipload of goods that arrived in its port. But trade invites pirates, and wealth invites envious rivals. To protect its commercial interests, Carthage developed one of the most formidable navies the world had ever seen. The star of their fleet was the quinquereme. Forget the small triremes you might have heard about. A quinquereme was a floating fortress, a massive warship powered by hundreds of oarsmen, likely arranged in a complex system of multiple rowers per oar. These ships weren't just about speed. They were about power. On the front, they sported a heavy bronze ram, designed to smash through the hulls of enemy ships with devastating force. On their decks stood towers filled with archers and marines, ready to rain down arrows or board and capture enemy vessels. Imagine the sight: a fleet of these behemoths, their sails catching the wind, hundreds of oars churning the sea into foam in perfect, terrifying unison. It was a spectacle designed to inspire awe in allies and sheer terror in enemies. For centuries, no one could challenge Carthaginian naval supremacy. They controlled the western Mediterranean with an iron grip. Islands like Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica became Carthaginian outposts, vital links in their maritime empire. The heart of this naval machine was the Cothon, the legendary circular harbor of Carthage. This wasn't just a place to park ships. It was a masterpiece of engineering and military secrecy. The outer rectangular harbor was for merchant vessels, bustling with commerce. But the real secret lay within, through a narrow, defensible channel. It opened into a circular inner harbor reserved exclusively for the navy. This military port could house over 200 warships in individual ship sheds, all radiating from a central island. On that island stood the admiral's headquarters, providing a commanding view of the entire fleet and the sea beyond. The Cothon was a symbol of Carthaginian power, organized, efficient, and hidden from prying eyes. It allowed them to build, repair, and launch their fleets in complete secrecy. So how did they maintain this massive navy? It came down to a combination of state funding and immense wealth from trade. The Carthaginian government understood that investing in the navy was investing in the city's survival and prosperity. They standardized ship designs, making repairs and construction faster and more efficient. They also developed skilled admirals and crews through constant practice and real-world experience, from fighting pirates to executing complex naval blockades. Men like Hannibal Barca and his son, the famous Hannibal, weren't just brilliant land generals. They understood the critical importance of sea power. For centuries, Carthage ruled the waves. But their dominance eventually brought them into conflict with a rising power on the Italian peninsula, Rome. The Romans were masters of the land with their disciplined legions. But at sea, they were novices. The First Punic War was at its core a clash of philosophies, the Roman legion versus the Carthaginian quinquereme. Initially, Carthage had every advantage. Their sailors were more experienced, their ships were superior, and their admirals knew the sea's every secret. Rome suffered devastating losses in early naval encounters. But the Romans had a genius for adaptation. They captured a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme, reverse-engineered it, and began building their own fleet. More importantly, they changed the rules of naval warfare. They invented a device called the corvus, or the crow. It was a massive boarding bridge with a heavy spike on the end. A Roman ship would ram an enemy vessel, drop the corvus to lock the two ships together, and then send their legions across to fight a land battle at sea. This brutal but effective innovation nullified the Carthaginian advantage in seamanship. Suddenly, naval battles became infantry brawls, a fight the Roman legionaries were born to win. The tide of the war began to turn. After more than 2 decades of brutal fighting, Rome finally defeated Carthage at sea, forcing a humiliating peace treaty. Though Carthage's naval power was broken, its legacy endured. It was Carthage that showed the world what a truly dedicated maritime empire could achieve. They had mastered naval logistics, military engineering, and strategic control of the seas on a scale never before seen. The Romans, their greatest enemies, learned their most valuable naval lessons from the very people they fought and ultimately destroyed. The naval tactics, the importance of controlling sea lanes, and the sheer scale of fleet operations all were lessons taught by the masters of the sea. The story of Carthage's navy is a powerful tale of innovation, ambition, and the timeless truth that whoever controls the sea often controls the future. While the city itself was reduced to rubble, the legend of its mighty fleet sails on through the pages of history, a testament to the naval superpower that once ruled the Mediterranean. Have you ever heard of a man who brought the mighty Roman Republic to its knees? A general so audacious, so brilliant, he became Rome's greatest nightmare. This is the story of Hannibal Barca, the man who dared to challenge an empire. In the 3rd century BC, the Mediterranean was a chessboard, and the two superpowers, Rome and Carthage, were the kings. After a bitter defeat in the First Punic War, Carthage was licking its wounds. But from this humiliation, a promise was forged. A young boy named Hannibal swore an oath to his father, eternal hatred for Rome. This was no childish vow. It was a destiny. Years later, Hannibal, now commander of Carthage's army in Spain, was ready to fulfill his oath. Rome expected a naval attack, a repeat of the last war. But Hannibal was a man who thought outside the box. He decided to do the unthinkable. march his army, including his famous war elephants, overland to invade Italy directly. The journey was a monumental feat of human will. His army of nearly 60,000 men faced treacherous terrain and hostile tribes as they crossed the formidable Pyrenees Mountains. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was the Alps. Imagine the scene: a massive army with elephants scaling snow-covered peaks, battling freezing temperatures, avalanches, and relentless guerrilla attacks. The Alps almost broke them. Hannibal lost nearly half his men and most of his elephants. But he emerged on the other side, in the heart of Italy. He had achieved the impossible. The Romans, stunned by his arrival, scrambled to assemble their legions. They were confident, perhaps arrogant, fighting on home turf. Their first major test came at the Trebia River. On a cold December morning, Hannibal used his cunning to lure the overeager Romans into a trap. He hid a detachment of his best troops, who then attacked the Roman rear. It was a complete disaster for Rome. Hannibal had announced his arrival with a bloody victory. But he was just getting started. The following spring, Hannibal marched his army through a treacherous swamp, a move the Romans thought impossible. He emerged behind their lines near Lake Trasimene. Again, he used the landscape to his advantage. He ambushed the Roman army as it marched along the narrow shore of the lake, trapping them between his forces and the water. In the ensuing slaughter, another Roman army was annihilated. The news sent a shockwave of panic through Rome. For the first time, the city itself felt vulnerable. The Romans were desperate. They appointed a dictator, Fabius Maximus, who devised a new, controversial strategy. He refused to face Hannibal in a direct battle. Instead, he shadowed Hannibal's army, launching small-scale attacks, disrupting his supply lines, and wearing his forces down. This became known as the Fabian strategy, a war of attrition. It was frustrating for Hannibal, who needed decisive victories to win over Rome's allies. But the Roman people grew impatient with Fabius's cautious approach. They wanted a glorious victory to restore their honor. So they amassed the largest army they had ever fielded, some 80,000 men, and marched to confront Hannibal at a place called Cannae. It was exactly what Hannibal wanted. At Cannae, Hannibal executed what is still considered one of the greatest tactical masterpieces in military history. He knew he was outnumbered, so he arranged his troops in a unique formation, a crescent shape with his weaker infantry in the center and his elite African infantry on the flanks. As the Romans pushed forward, the center of Hannibal's line deliberately gave way, drawing the massive Roman force deeper and deeper into a pocket. Then, at the perfect moment, Hannibal's elite infantry on the wings wheeled inwards, and his cavalry, having defeated their Roman counterparts, swept around to attack the Roman rear. The trap was sprung. The Roman army was completely encircled. What followed was a massacre. Trapped with no room to fight, the Romans were cut down by the thousands. By the end of the day, over 50,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on the field. It was Rome's darkest day. Cannae should have been the end. Any other nation would have surrendered. But Rome was different. The Romans' greatest strength wasn't their legions. It was their unbreakable will. They mourned, but they did not break. They refused to negotiate. They raised new armies, pulling from every available source, even arming slaves and prisoners. While Hannibal rampaged through southern Italy, unable to take the heavily fortified city of Rome itself, the Romans fought back on other fronts. A brilliant young general named Scipio began to turn the tide in Spain, cutting off Hannibal's reinforcements. For over a decade, Hannibal remained in Italy, a king without a crown, a conqueror trapped in the land he had conquered. His army slowly dwindled, worn down by years of fighting and the Fabian strategy. His Italian allies began to desert him as the tide of war shifted. The final act of this epic drama took place not in Italy, but back in Africa. Scipio, having conquered Spain, boldly invaded Carthage's homeland, forcing their hand. Hannibal was recalled to defend his city. The two greatest generals of the age would finally meet face-to-face at the Battle of Zama. At Zama, Scipio had studied Hannibal's tactics. When Hannibal unleashed his remaining elephants, the Roman legions simply opened lanes in their formation, letting the beasts run harmlessly through. In the battle that followed, Scipio's superior cavalry proved decisive, mirroring the tactic Hannibal had used so devastatingly at Cannae. They attacked Hannibal's army from the rear. The hunter had become the hunted. Hannibal's army was shattered, and he was defeated for the first time in a major battle. The war was over. Carthage was forced to accept a humiliating peace treaty. Hannibal himself lived on for many years, a hunted exile, but his dream of breaking Rome was gone. So what is Hannibal's legacy? He was a military genius, a master of strategy and tactics whose battles are still studied today. He brought the Roman Republic to the very brink of collapse, single-handedly shaping one of the most critical periods in ancient history. Yet, he ultimately failed. He won every battle but lost the war. His story is a powerful testament to the idea that even the most brilliant individual can be overcome by a resilient and determined society. Hannibal Barca, the nightmare of Rome, remains one of history's most fascinating and tragic heroes. Imagine a queen exiled from her homeland, landing on the shores of North Africa with a clever plan. She strikes a deal with the local ruler. She can have as much land as she can cover with a single ox hide. A seemingly small price, right? But Queen Dido was no ordinary woman. She had the ox hide cut into incredibly thin strips, laid them end to end, and encircled a huge piece of land. And on that very spot, a legendary city was born, Carthage. This is the story of its rise from a clever bargain to a mighty empire, and its tragic fall. From its legendary founding around 814 BC, Carthage was destined for greatness. Situated on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, its location was perfect. It had a superb natural harbor, making it an ideal hub for trade across the Mediterranean. The Phoenician settlers, led by Dido, were master sailors and savvy merchants. They didn't just build a city, they built a commercial powerhouse. Carthage quickly grew from a small settlement into a bustling metropolis. Its ships, some of the most advanced of their time, sailed to every corner of the known world. They ventured through the treacherous Strait of Gibraltar, known as the Pillars of Hercules, reaching the tin mines of Britain and possibly even sailing down the west coast of Africa. Imagine the wealth flowing into the city. Silver from Spain, tin from Britain, gold and ivory from Africa, and fine textiles from the east. Carthaginian markets were a kaleidoscope of cultures and goods, buzzing with activity. This trade didn't just make individuals rich, it built the foundation of an empire. Carthage established colonies and trading posts across the Mediterranean, from Sicily and Sardinia to the coast of Spain. Unlike the Roman Empire, which was built on military conquest, the Carthaginian Empire was primarily a commercial one. They controlled the sea lanes, and controlling the sea meant controlling the wealth. Their navy was formidable, not just for war, but for protecting their merchant fleets from pirates and rivals. The city itself became a symbol of this prosperity, with magnificent temples, grand public buildings, and luxurious villas for its wealthy citizens. Life in Carthage was, for many, a life of comfort and abundance, built on the back of a vast, interconnected network of trade that made it the jewel of the ancient world. But what did these wealthy merchants and powerful sailors believe in? The spiritual heart of Carthage was as complex and mysterious as its trade networks. At the center of their pantheon were two powerful deities, Baal-Hamon and Tanit. Baal-Hamon was the chief god, a weather god often depicted as a mature, bearded man with ram's horns. He was seen as the king of the gods, the provider of fertility and harvest. His consort Tanit was perhaps even more revered. She was a celestial goddess, linked to the moon, fertility, and childbirth. Her symbol, a triangle topped with a horizontal line and a circle, is found all over Carthaginian ruins, a constant reminder of her protective presence over the city. The Carthaginians built special sanctuaries to honor their gods, the most famous of which is the Tophet. And it is here that we encounter the most controversial and debated aspect of their culture, child sacrifice. Ancient writers, particularly their Roman and Greek rivals, paint a grim picture. They describe rituals where the firstborn children of noble families were sacrificed to Baal-Hamon and Tanit, especially during times of crisis, to appease the gods and ensure the city's survival. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of urns at Tophet sites, containing the cremated remains of infants and young children, buried alongside animal remains. For centuries, this was taken as proof of the gruesome practice. However, modern scholars are re-examining the evidence. Some argue that these sites were simply special cemeteries for children who died of natural causes, given that infant mortality was incredibly high in the ancient world. They suggest the stories of sacrifice were propaganda, spread by Carthage's enemies to demonize them. Were the Carthaginians performing these dark rituals, or were they victims of ancient fake news? The truth remains buried in the ashes of the past, a haunting mystery at the core of Carthaginian identity. This debate highlights how much of Carthage's story was written by its conquerors, leaving us to piece together the fragments of a complex and perhaps misunderstood civilization. As Carthage's power grew, it inevitably clashed with another rising power in the Mediterranean, Rome. This rivalry would ignite a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars, a century-long struggle for supremacy that would shape the course of Western history. The First War was a brutal naval contest for control of Sicily. After more than 2 decades of fighting, Rome, a land power that had to build a navy from scratch, emerged victorious. Carthage was humbled, forced to pay a huge indemnity and give up its Sicilian territories, but this was only the beginning. It was in the aftermath of this defeat that Carthage found its greatest champion, a military genius whose name would echo through eternity, Hannibal Barca. As a boy, Hannibal supposedly swore a sacred oath to his father to forever be an enemy of Rome. He was a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader, and a master of logistics. When the Second Punic War erupted, Hannibal did the unthinkable. Instead of challenging Rome's naval supremacy, he decided to take the fight directly to them, on their own soil. In 218 BC, he assembled a massive army, complete with cavalry and his famous war elephants, and embarked on one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. He marched his forces from Spain, across the Pyrenees Mountains, and then faced his greatest challenge, the Alps. The brutal journey through the snow-covered passes cost him nearly half his men and most of his elephants. But the army that descended into Italy was battle-hardened and utterly devoted to its commander. For the next 15 years, Hannibal terrorized Italy. He inflicted a series of devastating defeats on the Romans, culminating in the Battle of Cannae. Hannibal's smaller army completely encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman force in a masterclass of tactical brilliance that is still studied by military leaders today. It was Rome's darkest hour. The city was in a panic, and it seemed as though nothing could stop Hannibal. But Hannibal had a problem. He could win battles, but he couldn't win the war. He lacked the siege equipment and reinforcements needed to take the city of Rome itself. Meanwhile, the Romans, demonstrating their incredible resilience, adopted a new strategy. Under the general Fabius Maximus, they avoided direct confrontation, instead harassing Hannibal's supply lines and slowly wearing his army down. A young Roman general named Scipio took the war to Carthaginian territories in Spain, cutting off Hannibal's support base. Then, Scipio made a bold move, mirroring Hannibal's own strategy. He invaded North Africa, threatening Carthage directly. This forced Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy to defend his homeland. The two great generals finally met at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. This time it was Scipio who emerged victorious. He had studied Hannibal's tactics and used them against him. Hannibal was defeated, and Carthage was forced to accept a humiliating peace treaty. Its empire was dismantled, its navy scuttled, and its military power broken. Even in defeat, Carthage remained a prosperous city, its commercial spirit unbroken. But for some in Rome, like the Senator Cato the Elder, that was unacceptable. He ended every speech, no matter the topic, with the chilling phrase, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. This relentless call for annihilation eventually led to the Third Punic War. It was less a war and more a final, brutal act of vengeance. The Romans besieged the city for 3 years. The Carthaginians, knowing their fate, fought with desperate courage. When the walls were finally breached in 146 BC, what followed was a week of horrific slaughter. The Roman soldiers went from house to house, destroying everything and everyone in their path. The city that had stood for nearly 700 years was systematically demolished. Buildings were torn down and the great harbor was destroyed. Legend says the Romans then sowed the land with salt to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again. While historians debate the salt story, the intention was clear: to erase Carthage from history. The jewel of the Mediterranean, the city founded on a clever queen's bargain, the empire built on trade, the home of Hannibal, was reduced to rubble and ash. Its people were gone, its culture silenced, its story left to be told by its bitter enemies. But legends are hard to kill. The story of Carthage, of its incredible rise and its tragic, brutal end, continues to fascinate and caution us, a powerful reminder of how even the mightiest empires can fall. For over a century, the Mediterranean Sea was a battleground for two titans, Rome and Carthage. From the sun-drenched fields of Sicily to the icy peaks of the Alps, their armies clashed in a struggle for supremacy. The First Punic War saw Rome forge a navy to challenge Carthage's maritime dominance. The Second Punic War brought the legendary Hannibal Barca to the very gates of Rome, a nightmare that haunted the Roman psyche for generations. Even after Hannibal's defeat at Zama, a deep-seated fear and hatred of Carthage lingered in the heart of the Roman Republic. The famous senator, Cato the Elder, ended every speech, no matter the topic, with the chilling words, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. This wasn't just political rhetoric. It was a promise, a vow of vengeance that would one day be fulfilled in the most brutal way imaginable. The stage was set for a final catastrophic act in this epic drama of empires. The peace treaty that ended the Second Punic War was designed to cripple Carthage permanently. They lost their overseas territories, paid a massive indemnity, and most critically, were forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. For 50 years, Carthage endured this humiliation. They rebuilt their city, their trade flourished once more, and they patiently abided by the harsh terms. But Rome's ally, the neighboring kingdom of Numidia, saw an opportunity. They repeatedly raided Carthaginian territory, stealing land and livestock, knowing Carthage's hands were tied. Desperate, Carthage sent appeal after appeal to Rome, but the Senate, influenced by hardliners like Cato, turned a blind eye. Finally, pushed to the breaking point, Carthage raised an army to defend itself against Numidian aggression. This was the moment Rome had been waiting for. It was a technical breach of the treaty. The Senate didn't see a desperate nation defending its borders. They saw an excuse. In 149 BC, Rome declared war. The Third Punic War had begun, not as a clash of equals, but as a final, predetermined act of annihilation. The Roman legions landed in North Africa, not to fight a battle, but to accept a surrender. The terrified Carthaginians, knowing they couldn't possibly win, offered to meet any demand. Rome's first command was for Carthage to hand over 300 children from their noblest families as hostages. Heartbroken, they complied. Next, Rome demanded they surrender all of their weapons and armor. An endless procession of carts creaked out of the city, delivering over 200,000 sets of armor and thousands of catapults to the Roman camp. Carthage was now completely defenseless. It was then that the Roman consul delivered the final, unthinkable ultimatum. The people of Carthage were to abandon their city, which was to be razed to the ground. They were permitted to build a new settlement, but it had to be at least 10 miles inland, cut off from the sea that was its lifeblood. For a city of merchants and sailors, this was a death sentence. The initial despair of the Carthaginian envoys turned to pure, unadulterated rage. The people of Carthage, betrayed and cornered, chose defiance over a slow, agonizing demise. They would fight. The gates of the city were barred, and the siege of Carthage began. What followed was one of the most heroic and desperate last stands in ancient history. The entire city transformed into a weapons factory. Public buildings were torn down for timber. Temples were melted down for metal. Women cut off their long hair to be braided into ropes for catapults. Every citizen, man, woman, and child became a part of the war effort. For nearly 3 years, the seemingly defenseless city held off the might of Rome. The Romans, expecting an easy victory, were stunned by the ferocity of the resistance. They suffered setbacks, their commanders proving incompetent against the brilliant defensive strategies of the Carthaginian general, Hasdrubal the Boeotarch. The siege dragged on, a bloody stalemate under the African sun. Finally, Rome turned to the one man they knew could finish the job. Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the great Scipio Africanus who had defeated Hannibal. A brilliant and ruthless commander, Scipio arrived and immediately tightened the noose. He built a massive mole to blockade the harbor, cutting off all seaborne supplies. He constructed towering siege engines and relentlessly pounded the city walls. The defenders, starving and exhausted, fought for every inch of their home, but the end was inevitable. In the spring of 146 BC, the final assault began. Roman legionaries breached the walls and poured into the city. What followed was not a battle, but a week-long massacre. The fighting moved from house to house through narrow, winding streets. The Romans showed no mercy, slaughtering everyone they found. To clear the streets of bodies and rubble, they set fire to the buildings, often with people still inside. The screams of the dying mingled with the roar of the flames and the crash of collapsing roofs. The Carthaginians made their last stand at the Byrsa, the city's citadel, and the great temple of Eshmun. When further resistance became impossible, the remaining defenders chose death over surrender. Hasdrubal's own wife, berating her husband for surrendering to Scipio, threw herself and her children into the flames of the burning temple. After 6 days of unspeakable horror, the fighting finally ceased. Out of a population of perhaps 500,000, only 50,000 remained, who were then sold into slavery. Scipio Aemilianus, looking out over the smoldering ruins of the once great city, is said to have wept. He quoted a line from Homer's Iliad, foreseeing a day when Rome itself might suffer a similar fate. But his orders were clear. The Senate's will was absolute. For 17 days, the fires raged, consuming everything. What fire didn't destroy, the legions tore down by hand. Stone by stone, the mighty city of Carthage was systematically demolished until nothing was left standing. Then came the final symbolic act. Roman plows were dragged across the ruins, and legend tells us that tons of salt were sown into the earth to ensure that nothing would ever grow there again. Rome had not just defeated its rival, it had erased it from existence. A curse was placed upon the land, forbidding anyone from ever living there again. The Punic Wars were over. Carthage was no more. Its history, its culture, its very memory were to be buried under salt and stone, a chilling testament to the terrifying and absolute power of Rome. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into history compelling, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.